Studio lights burned bright as the audience settled in for what was billed as a groundbreaking conversation. Oprah Winfrey sat at the center of the stage, her presence commanding attention. Facing her was Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp tongue and unshakable confidence. From the start, Oprah leaned forward with piercing questions. She challenged Crockett's policies, pushed on controversial points, and even interrupted her answers more than once. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing tension building with every exchange. At first, Crockett remained calm, listening intently as Oprah raised her voice and tried to frame the conversation in her favor. But Oprah went further, throwing in barbed remarks that felt more like an attack than a question. Gasps echoed through the studio as the host's tone grew sharper. Then, with perfect timing, Crockett struck back. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but firm, cutting through the noise like a blade. In a matter of seconds, she dismantled Oprah's argument point by point, exposing contradictions and turning the crowd in her favor. The audience erupted with applause. Viewers at home took to social media instantly, clips of the exchange spreading like wildfire. Oprah, stunned, leaned back in her chair, unable to counter Crockett's precise and fearless words. For the first time that night, the legendary host sat in silence. By the end of the broadcast, it was clear who had owned the stage. Crockett's clapback wasn't just a defense, it was a defining moment. She had taken the challenge head-on and walked away victorious, leaving even Oprah Winfrey speechless. As the applause finally died down, Oprah adjusted her papers, visibly rattled but trying to regain control of the show. Her smile tightened, masking the surprise she clearly felt. She leaned back toward the microphone and said, "Well, Representative Crockett, that was quite the response. But don't you think your critics would argue that you avoided the real issue here?" The audience grew quiet again, waiting for Crockett's reply. But Crockett didn't rush. She paused deliberately, her eyes locked on Oprah's, as if to say she wouldn't be rushed or intimidated. The silence stretched, creating tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Finally, Crockett spoke. "Oprah, the real issue is accountability. And accountability doesn't vanish just because the question is framed in a way that looks dramatic for television. The people watching tonight deserve the truth, not a performance." The crowd burst into cheers, some even standing, while Oprah's expression froze for a second. Cameras zoomed in on her face, catching the exact moment she realized she had underestimated her guest. Oprah tried to interject, but the audience wouldn't calm down. Crockett had struck a nerve, and the energy in the room was no longer in the host's control. When the audience finally settled, Oprah leaned forward again, determined not to lose her footing. She raised her hand slightly, signaling she was taking back control of the conversation. Her tone sharpened. "Representative Crockett," Oprah said firmly, "people say you speak with passion, but passion without results is just noise. What do you actually have to show for all the bold statements you make?" The crowd let out a collective "oh," sensing the jab. Oprah folded her arms, expecting Crockett to stumble or scramble for an answer. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her own arms, and with a calm smile said, "Oprah, I didn't come here to list my resume for applause. I came here to remind people that leadership is about telling the truth, even when it isn't comfortable. And if my words sound like noise to those in power, that only means the truth is ringing loud enough to shake the walls." The audience erupted again, louder this time, some standing and clapping with force. Oprah's confident facade cracked for a moment, her eyes widened, and she let out a tight laugh, realizing her attempt to corner Crockett had backfired on live television. Oprah, clearly frustrated now, decided to raise the stakes. She leaned forward, cutting Crockett off mid-sentence. Hold on," Oprah said, waving her hand as if she was swatting away Crockett's words. "You're very good at speeches, but let's be honest here. If you had the kind of power you claim, wouldn't the changes you talk about already be happening? Isn't it fair to say you're overpromising and underdelivering?" The audience gasped at the interruption, murmurs spreading through the studio. Some clapped, sensing Oprah had gone for a decisive strike. But Crockett only smiled wider. She let the noise build for a moment before leaning forward, her tone calm but razor-sharp. "Oprah, I respect your platform, but let's not confuse interruptions with victories. The fact is, real change doesn't come overnight, and it doesn't come from silencing people who are fighting for it. If I were overpromising, you wouldn't feel the need to interrupt me to try and stop my point from landing." The studio roared. Some of the audience members rose to their feet, clapping and shouting as Oprah's face froze for a split second, caught off guard by the precision of the clapback. For the first time, the camera caught Oprah shifting in her chair, her composure cracking as Crockett's words echoed louder than any interruption could. Oprah inhaled slowly, clearly aware the momentum was slipping out of her hands. She straightened in her chair, trying to project authority as the crowd settled down. Her voice dropped lower, more deliberate. "Representative Crockett," she began, "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, and cultural icons. Many of them carried themselves with humility, understanding that leadership isn't about winning arguments but serving people quietly. Do you think your confrontational style actually helps you serve, or does it just help you go viral?" The audience fell silent. It was a loaded question, personal, sharp, and designed to paint Crockett as more interested in fame than service. Crockett tilted her head slightly, unfazed. Her voice was measured, almost soft, but every word carried weight. "Oprah, with all due respect, being quiet in the face of injustice isn't humility, it's complicity. Viral moments don't happen because I shout louder. They happen because I refuse to let the truth be buried under polite silence. If that truth resonates with millions, maybe it's because people are tired of watching leaders stay quiet while nothing changes." The crowd exploded again, this time with a standing ovation that drowned out Oprah's attempt to respond. Some audience members whistled, others chanted Crockett's name, while Oprah sat frozen, forced to wait out the wave of applause. The cameras caught the exact image. Oprah's legendary poise rattled, while Crockett sat confident, leaning back in her chair, letting the crowd roar on her behalf. The cheers echoed long after Oprah lifted her hand, signaling for quiet. Determined not to lose her footing, she reached for a note card on the table. Her eyes narrowed as she read, clearly shifting to a prepared angle. "Representative Crockett," Oprah said firmly, "let me share something. According to this recent poll, a majority of people believe leaders like you are more interested in grandstanding than passing actual legislation. Numbers don't lie. How do you explain that?" The audience leaned in, sensing Oprah was trying to land a decisive blow with cold, hard facts. She tapped the card lightly on the table, confident the statistic would corner her guest. But Crockett smiled knowingly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She leaned forward, her voice steady and clear. "Oprah, numbers don't lie, but how they're used can. A poll can be framed to reflect whatever headline someone wants. What people are actually tired of is leaders who sit quietly while nothing changes. If standing up and refusing to back down is called grandstanding, then I'll wear that label proudly. Because silence has never passed a single law." The audience erupted once more, louder than before, with a mix of cheers and applause that shook the stage. Some people shouted, "That's right," while others clapped so hard the sound carried over Oprah's microphone. Oprah's hand froze mid-tap on the card. For the first time, she looked caught, her carefully prepared note dismantled in seconds, her authority slipping live on air. Oprah exhaled slowly, realizing her notes had failed her. She placed the card back on the table and shifted her strategy. Her voice softened, carrying a tone that mixed disappointment with concern. "Jasmine," Oprah said, dropping the formality of representative, "do you ever stop to think about how your style affects young people watching you? They see the fire, the confrontations, the clashes. Are you teaching them to argue, or to lead?" The audience quieted instantly. Oprah's emotional appeal struck differently. It wasn't about facts or numbers, but character. She was trying to shift the narrative, painting Crockett as reckless rather than inspiring. But Crockett leaned in, her expression unwavering. She let the silence hang for a moment before replying, her words deliberate. Oprah, young people don't need to be taught how to argue. They already know what it feels like to be ignored. What they need is someone showing them that their voice matters, even when the world tries to silence it. If my fire gives them courage to speak truth to power, then that's leadership, not noise. The audience broke into thunderous applause, louder than any moment yet. Some stood, clapping above their heads, while others shouted words of support. The camera panned across the crowd, faces lit up, inspired, energized. Oprah blinked, caught between admiration and frustration. For the first time, it seemed even she was questioning whether she had underestimated the force sitting across from her. Oprah leaned forward again, determination flickering in her eyes. She wasn't ready to let go. Shuffling through her notes, she raised her voice just slightly, aiming for a decisive strike. Representative Crockett, it's not just me saying this. Prominent voices, respected leaders, even members of your own party, have said your approach is too combative, too disruptive. If those closest to you are questioning your methods, doesn't that prove the critics are right? The audience murmured, the weight of Oprah's words hitting hard. She had shifted the spotlight away from herself and placed Crockett under the scrutiny of her own peers. Crockett, however, didn't flinch. She leaned into the mic, her expression sharp but calm, her tone cutting through the tension like glass. Oprah, when people in power feel uncomfortable, they call you combative. When you refuse to stay silent, they call you disruptive. But let's be honest, every meaningful change in history was led by someone who refused to sit quietly and play nice. So if the worst thing my critics can say is that I fight too hard, I'll take that as confirmation I'm doing my job. The crowd exploded. The applause drowned out everything, so loud Oprah had to wait before speaking again. Some audience members pointed toward Crockett with admiration, while others shouted, "That's leadership." Oprah froze for a moment, her face betraying both disbelief and respect. The live broadcast had turned into something she hadn't anticipated, a showcase of Crockett's unshakable resolve. The energy in the studio was electric, but Oprah wasn't ready to concede. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a serious, almost grave tone. "Jasmine," she began slowly, "critics can be dismissed, applause can be loud, but at the end of the day, leadership is lonely. When the cameras turn off and the cheering stops, do you honestly believe you're prepared to carry that weight? Or is this just about the spotlight?" The question landed heavy, and the room fell silent. It wasn't just a challenge, it was personal. Oprah's words carried the weight of someone who had lived in the spotlight for decades, hinting that Crockett might not be able to endure it. Crockett didn't look shaken. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Oprah, her tone calm yet commanding. "Oprah, I don't carry this weight because I want the spotlight. I carry it because the people who trusted me don't have one. When the cameras turn off, I don't go home to applause, I go back to the same communities that sent me here, and they remind me exactly why I fight." The spotlight fades. The responsibility doesn't. The audience erupted again, but this time the applause felt different, deeper, more emotional. People weren't just clapping, some were wiping their eyes, moved by the raw conviction in Crockett's voice. Oprah sat back, her lips parted slightly, unable to mask her surprise. For the first time in the night, she seemed speechless, and the cameras caught it all. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as the audience's applause finally softened. Oprah shifted in her chair, clasping her hands together, her face composed but her eyes betraying tension. She knew this was her last chance to regain control. She leaned forward, her voice steady and deliberate. "Jasmine," she said, "you've made powerful statements tonight. But history judges leaders not by their words, but by what they leave behind. So I'll ask you this directly, when your time is over, what will people really remember about you? Your fights, or your results?" The silence that followed was absolute. Oprah had thrown down what she clearly believed was her knockout line. The audience leaned in, hanging on Crockett's next words. Crockett didn't blink. She folded her hands on the table and delivered her response without hesitation. They'll remember that I never backed down when it mattered most. Results are important, but results come from the fights no one else is willing to have. If history remembers me as the woman who refused to be silenced, then that's a legacy I'll wear proudly. Because silence leaves nothing behind but regrets. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation, louder than any moment before. People were shouting her name, clapping above their heads, the studio shaking with energy. Oprah froze, her final question dismantled in front of millions. Cameras caught her tight smile, but it was clear, she had been stunned into silence by Crockett's clapback. That single exchange lit up social media within minutes, clips spreading like wildfire. The headline was written before the show even ended, Crockett leaves Oprah speechless. As the broadcast wrapped, the studio buzzed with energy. Audience members pulled out their phones, recording the aftermath while still chanting Crockett's name. Oprah smiled tightly for the cameras, but her silence in that final moment was already cemented as the headline of the night. Within minutes of the show ending, clips of Crockett's clapback flooded social media. Hashtags with her name shot to the top of trending lists. Short clips of Oprah's stunned reaction were looped endlessly with captions like, "She wasn't ready," and Crockett just ended the debate in one line. Comment sections exploded. Some viewers praised Oprah's legacy but admitted she had been outmatched. Others hailed Crockett as the voice they had been waiting for, someone unafraid to say what others only whispered. News outlets scrambled to cover the viral moment. Late-night hosts replayed the clip, analysts broke down Crockett's delivery, and even political commentators admitted her words had landed with historic force. For Oprah, it was a rare moment of being on the receiving end of the kind of cultural earthquake she had so often created. For Crockett, it was confirmation. Her voice had cut through not only the studio walls, but into living rooms across the nation. The morning after the broadcast, every major network replayed the clash. Crockett's final words were spliced into highlight reels, while Oprah's silent reaction became the still image plastered across headlines. Reporters crowded outside Crockett's office, eager for her first response to the viral firestorm. By midday, she agreed to a short interview on the steps of the Capitol. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the microphones, poised and collected. A journalist shouted, "Representative Crockett, last night's exchange has been watched over 10 million times already. Do you have anything to say about going viral?" Crockett smiled, shaking her head slightly before answering. "I didn't show up to go viral. I showed up to tell the truth. If the truth travels fast, that just proves how hungry people are to hear it. My job isn't to trend. My job is to represent those who don't have a seat at the table." The crowd of reporters buzzed with follow-up questions, but the line had already made the evening news cycle. Social media users clipped it instantly, captioning it, "Crockett isn't chasing fame. Fame is chasing her." Oprah remained silent publicly, but the contrast was clear. While she tried to recover privately, Crockett was doubling down, seizing the momentum with confidence that made her rise seem unstoppable. For nearly 2 days, Oprah said nothing. The silence only fueled speculation. Commentators debated whether she was regrouping or whether Crockett's words had struck too deep. Finally, Oprah released a statement during her own podcast taping. Her tone was calm, but the message was pointed. "Representative Crockett is passionate, no doubt," Oprah said. "But passion isn't the same as progress. We should be careful not to mistake a viral moment for true leadership. History isn't written in sound bites." The clip spread quickly, but instead of weakening Crockett's momentum, it ignited another wave of support. Crockett's allies and everyday citizens flooded social media with responses, posting, "History is written by those who dare to speak when silence is demanded." Crockett herself finally responded in a brief press conference. She didn't attack Oprah directly. Instead, she smiled and said, "History isn't written in silence either. That single sentence ricocheted across headlines, instantly trending. Oprah's attempt to reclaim the narrative had backfired, amplifying Crockett's words even further. The contrast was undeniable. Oprah's message felt defensive. Crockett's response felt like a rallying cry. And once again, the public made it clear who had won the moment. By the end of the week, Crockett's momentum had transformed from a viral clip into a political wave. Donations to her campaign poured in at record speed. Grassroots groups used her quotes on posters, t-shirts, and banners. One line in particular, "Silence leaves nothing but regrets," became a rallying slogan. Political analysts, who once dismissed her as too fiery, were now forced to admit she had tapped into something deeper. Talk shows replayed her exchange with Oprah not as a one-night moment, but as the spark of a movement. Even critics within her own party, who had once accused her of being too confrontational, fell silent as polls showed her. Approval numbers climbing. Younger voters especially rallied behind her, flooding social media with messages like, "finally, someone who fights like we would." Meanwhile, Oprah's statement faded quickly, overshadowed by the unstoppable momentum Crockett had built. What was intended as a critique now looked like the exact fuel Crockett needed to rise even higher. The viral moment had become more than television history. It was now shaping the political landscape in real time, and Crockett stood at the center, unshaken, her voice louder than ever. Weeks after the clash, Crockett stood on a massive stage at a packed town hall.